All right, so this is our task list for Windows Server 2019. Our goal here, or the task we need to complete, are to first promote the server to a domain controller. Remember, a domain controller is a Windows server that holds the Active Directory database. That's the database that contains all of the configurations for the various resources, things like users, computers that are on your say your corporate network. So we got to make this a domain controller. Once we promote our server to a domain controller, them will be able to create, in addition to local user accounts, network user accounts. So that's going to be the first thing we do after we get a domain controller in place. We're going to use some tools inside of it to create a custom network user account. Then we're also going to create what they call an organizational unit. In the Active Directory database, the way that we group things together into a logical order is by using what we call OUs, or organizational units. We're going to create a OU called groups because it doesn't exist by default. By default, there's only going to be a users OU, and they're going to throw groups and users all into the same OU. So it's kind of like a best practice. Is a good idea to separate that out. It just makes it easier to find things. So we're going to make that groups OU, and then once we create that groups OU, inside of that OU, we're going to create an actual group called sysadmins, and then we're going to make our user account that we've created a member of the sysadmins groups, because as I mentioned in the lesson, it is a best practice to manage permissions from the group level instead of for individual users. All right, so let's get into our server 2019 VM. So let me pull that up really quick. Let me go full screen with this guy. That's all I want. Full screen. There we go. All right. And the first thing I want to do is I want to launch a tool called Server Manager. So you can search for that. Search for server. And then there's my Server Manager tool. If I kick that off, then you'll notice that I get this Server Manager dashboard. Now down here, you can see that I have some roles already installed. I've actually already set this up as an Active Directory server, but I'm going to show you the steps needed to get that going. By default, your server, when you build it, is just going to be a file and storage server, but you can add additional roles. So a role is basically what a server is capable of doing. All right. So what I want to do in order to show you how to set this up as a domain controller is I want to go to the top of this server manager dashboard. I'm going to go to the manage link. You click on that. And then I have an option that says add roles and features. You'll select that. Once you select that, it's going to open up a wizard. And this wizard is going to basically walk you through the steps that you need to take in order to add a new server role. Again, a role being what the server is able to do. And the role we want is called ADDS, so it's Active Directory Services. This first page is just telling me some things I need to consider before moving forward. I probably want to make sure that my administrator password is strong, makes sense. Servers usually have static IP addresses or internet protocol addresses. That way they're always reachable. You don't want your server changing IP addresses every 30 to 60 or 60 days or something like that. Then how can you communicate with it? So you give your server a static IP address, and then of course run your security updates. Now all those things have already been done, and we're not going to cover that here. That'll be for something later when we get into the networking piece. But again, these are all considerations if in the real world you were setting up this server. So we're going to hit next. Here we get to define whether this is going to be a role-based or feature-based installation or a remote desktop service installation. We're going to go with the role and feature-based because, again, we're applying a role. And then we say next. Now we get to determine what server we want this to affect. Now, in our environment, there's only one server, so there's not a lot of options. But if this was a actual, functional network, you might have multiple servers in your environment. And what you'd be able to do from this perspective is connect to those servers, and you could actually deploy server roles onto those other servers from this one central server. We only have one server, and that's the one highlighted. So we're going to move forward with that. And now we get to the point where we're going to be able to add services. So again, as I mentioned before, the service that you want to install is Active Directory domain services. I already have it installed, but to identify that service, you'll just click the checkbox beside Active Directory domain services. And then if you want to read the description of what that does, you can read that over here. But essentially, it's just, again, going to give you that Active Directory database. It's going to contain all the objects on your network. You select that, and then you'll hit next. What you'll see on your screen, since you haven't done the installation before, is you'll see a listing of all of the other features that come along with when you that need to be installed. Because they have the Active Directory has dependencies on them. So there's a bunch of other features that are already installed in your system. They just haven't been turned on. But once you give your server that domain controller status, it has to have these features on in order for you to properly manage it. So Windows helps you out. It says, okay, yeah, I see you want a domain controller, but guess what? You need these 7 other features as well. Here's what they are. Just accept those and hit next to go to the next features option. I haven't selected anything. That's why the confirmation isn't installed. I'll just choose some other feature just to keep it moving. Let me see some low-hanging fruit feature. So for you guys, don't worry about this particular part. I'm just doing this so you can see the last step. Okay, so that add features, that'll be similar to what you'll see. And then now that I've added a feature, I can hit next, and then you get your confirmation. Your confirmation screen will list out the Active Directory items, and then also it'll list out the features that get installed with that. It's always a good idea to check this box here to restart destination server automatically if required, because a lot of these features and roles won't fully install until you reboot the system. So check that box, and that way once it finishes doing its thing, it'll automatically reboot, and then you'll be on your way. Once you have approved this, you can hit the install button. It'll take a little while, but Active Directory will get installed on that system. Again, it's going to require a reboot, and then you'll also have an option that's going to require you to promote your domain controller. So you'll click on that. So actually here, since I've ran the installation already, that option is already here. So you see this box by the notification flag. It says promote this server to a domain controller. If I click on that, then it'll open up that domain controller portion. Here, I get to define how my domain is going to be set up. If this is an existing domain, like for example, you already had a network, and now you want to add a domain controller to that existing network, because you're allowed to have more than one domain controller for redundancy purposes, then you choose that top option. The next option, add a new domain to an existing forest. In Windows speak, a forest is a collection of domains. So think of Microsoft. Microsoft is a huge network. They're a huge enterprise, and underneath of the umbrella of Microsoft, they have multiple domains. They've got their Microsoft.com, but they've also got Outlook.com and Live.com and Hotmail.com and MSN.com. So all of these .coms are separate domains. But they're all part of the same Microsoft network. So if that is your setup, if you have this huge forest with multiple domains on it, then you can, and you want to add a new domain to that forest, you choose that second option. But because we don't have anything in place, we're going to create our own forest, and this is going to be a one domain forest. It's going to be a forest with one tree in it. We get to name what that root domain is going to be called. I'm going to call my root domain. What's a cool name? I'll say Saber. I don't know. Just sounds cool. And then I'm going to hit next. Oh, sorry. Got to put a dot. You got to give it a top level domain. So it could be a .com. It could be a .local. I'll do saber.local. Let it do its thing. Server 2019 and Server 2016 use the same functionality when it comes to forests, so there's no difference there. That's why it says Server 2016. And then I'm going to keep these defaults for domain names server. These are different domain controller capabilities. I want it to be my DNS server, and I'll let it be my global catalog as well. But again, those are already preset. Keep those. And then it's going to ask me for a password to create a password now, just in case I need to restore my database from a backup. So I'll give it a password. And now next is available, so I can hit next. I'm going to skip past this DNS option. We'll talk about DNS later in the course. And for NetBIOS, it should generate that automatically. Just give it a second. Your NetBIOS name is the name that other Windows servers will interpret this domain as. So if another Windows server needs to contact the domain, it doesn't need the .local piece. It just needs the Saber part of the name. All right, so that did its thing. It recognized the domain, the new domain I'm trying to create, or a new forest I'm trying to create. And I hit next. These are some additional options that are about to come up. Here I get to define the storage location for the database itself, the log files or the auditing for that database, and then any system files. I'm going to keep all those set to the default, and I'm going to do next again. This is my review page. I can check it to see if all of these configurations are what I intended them to be, and I can also actually export these configurations using this view script button, and it'll basically take all these settings and it'll put them in a configuration script that I can run using Windows PowerShell. And that way I can, if I wanted to, create multiple domain controllers with the same type of setup, I can automate that now using that script. We're going to move past this. These are all my options. I'm good. I can just hit next. And I was going to do a prerequisite check to make sure there's nothing missing in order for this install to go successful. All right, this may take a while, so I'm going to pause for a second until it can. Oh, spoke too soon. There it is. All right, so all prerequisite checks passed successfully. I got a couple of warnings there, but that's not a big deal. But it passed the prerequisite checks, so I can now hit install, and it'll actually do the installation of those domain controller features. And I'll pause this one until it's completed. All right, so the install completed and the server is coming back up from a reboot now. It's applying some computer settings. So we'll give that a chance to complete. I just wanted to let you see the reboot cycle. And now that I have my login screen back, notice that it no longer says just administrator. Probably on your server when you have been logging in before, it just said administrator because that was the local administrator account. Now that the server has been promoted to a domain controller, we now see the name of the domain and then administrator to signify that this is no longer just a work group server. It's now part of a domain. We'll use our password to get in. Those credentials just still remain the same. Let it load up. All right, and now that the server is back up, I see that the server manager has automatically launched and is still setting up the services, but I should be able to verify, even while it's still getting everything kind of set up, that this is now a domain controller, because when I go over here on the left side to the local server, where it says work group now saying unknown, that's going to change, and there it just did, to saber.local. That's the domain that we created. And now you notice that there are also a bunch of other server roles available. Should be available now on your system that weren't there before. In particular, this ADDS option. So now that domain exists, we can use some advanced tools. Let's go back to the dashboard. Back to our dashboard here. And now if I go under tools, there's a bunch of Active Directory tools available. The Active Directory tool that we want to focus on is Active Directory users and computers. I'll click on that one. Active Directory users and computers opens up, and I can see here that my saber.local domain is there. And if I hit the little arrow beside it, I can expand it and I can see all of these organizational units. They look like folders. They follow. Microsoft likes to make things very consistent across the board. So the same way they use that kind of file and folder navigation, the file cabinet kind of module or file cabinet type of method that they use in the client operating system, they also use it throughout the server operating system. Only difference is these particular folders will refer to these as OUs, or organizational units, but essentially they're used for the same purpose. They're used to help you organize things. But now instead of organizing files, we're organizing objects, and an object can be a lot of different stuff. It could be a user account, it could be a group, it could be a computer. Notice that there is a computers OU here. There's a domain controllers. So if I have more than one domain controller, I could add those to this OU. You see our domain controller. This win one, this is our domain controller that we just made, is already a member of that. And there's a lot of other built-in OUs. The one that we want to focus on is this users OU. Click on that. And notice that just like in Windows 10, there's a ton of prefabricated user and group accounts. The majority of these are group accounts, and we can tell by the type here. So there's an administrator user account. This is another account that I created earlier called A Stubblefield, and that's a user account. There's this default account anywhere where it says user, and then there's my W Sanders user account. I'm going to create another user account just so you can see the process. If you go to either this little icon of a person with a starburst by their face, that's the shortcut to create a new user. Or if you want to go the long way through the menus, you can go to action new user. Another way too is to right click in this open area of the right side of the screen, and you get that same menu. So I'm going to make a new user account. When that new user account wizard opens up, it's going to ask me for some information. It wants to know a first name, middle initial, last name. So none of those fields are necessarily required, but I'm going to fill those out. Sander. Let's make Luke. Froze up a little bit here. Let's escape out of that. There we go. And let's change this to Sky. Skywalker. All right. Kind of like a best practice a lot of times for the full name. A lot of admins will put this in the reverse order. That way it just makes it easier to sort when you're searching for people. So I'm gonna put the last name first, comma, Luke. And then for the login name, we're going to use the naming convention first letter of the first name and then the last name. And then it's at saber.local. Oh, I didn't actually plan that, but I guess you know where my mind is. Okay, Luke Skywalker at saber.local. Really? Anyway, so we've got our account basics now. We can hit next. Here's where we're going to define our password. Now, if I'm creating this account for a user, then I'm going to leave this checkbox checked. User must change password at next login, because what that'll do is that it'll effectively make this password a temporary password. We'll issue it to the client or the user. They log in for the first time, and then they're going to be prompted to change the password, and that way it's secure. They're the only ones who know it. I'm going to uncheck that for our purposes, and then I'm going to set a password on this account. Next, this is just to confirm the full name and the login, and then finish. And now I see that my new account, Luke Skywalker, has been created. Now, if I right click and look at the properties of that account, All right. I can see that if I go to, well, first of all, I see that there's a whole bunch of tabs that weren't there when I looked at, similar properties on the client system. So that's one thing. You get a lot more, you get to house a lot more information about user accounts and things like that when you're in a domain environment and you're on a domain controller. But one thing I want to look at specifically is this member of tab. Notice that when I click that member of, it shows me what groups that this account is by default a member of. And the only group is a default member of is the domain users. This domain users account is similar to the user's account on the local computer, except that this user account can be used to log into any system in the entire domain, whereas members of the users group on the local machine could only log into that one computer. But I don't want it to be just a member of this domain users, because remember, this is going to be a special account. So we need to add some more group memberships to Luke. But first, let's do some cleanup. This is a little cluttered. So one of our tasks was to create a separate OU specifically to house the groups. That way we'll be able to tell users from groups a lot easier. So I'm going to go up and I'm going to click on sabre.local to select the top level of the domain. And now I'm going to go to the actions menu. Now that I've selected the top of the domain, I'm going to have some different options that weren't available a second ago. I can now go to new and say group, and I can create my new group. Actually, not group yet. Cancel that. I'm going to create a new OU. Action, new, and I want to create a new organizational unit, a OU. And I'm going to call this OU groups. And then hit OK. So now you see I get a new OU there. It's empty right now, but I want to move some stuff into it. So I'm going to go back over to my users OU, and I'm going to select all of these different groups. I'm going to sort by type and get them all bunched together. Click on the first one, hold down shift and click the last one. That gets them all. And I can either drag them over to groups, or I can just right click and say move, and then tell it to move it to this groups OU. And now I have a nice clean list of actually just users, and then my groups are all sorted together. So now that I've done that, that's my second, that's one of my tasks. Which class is that? That is my third task, actually. I did my second task when I created Luke Skywalker. And then I'm going to complete my last task, which is creating this network group called sysadmins. So now, with my focus on the groups OU, I can go up to the action menu and say new group. And then I'm going to call this group sysadmin. Now, there's a couple options for different groups. Group scope and group type, rather. The scope is going to identify how powerful, for lack of a better term, this group is, where the bounds of its influence. If it's a domain local group, that means it only has power within that single domain. So think back to that Microsoft example where I said that in the Microsoft forest, there's multiple domains. If I create this sysadmin as a domain local group in that type of environment, it'll only be the admin account within a single domain, not the entire forest. The global group the global scope will allow it to be an admin in multiple domains in the forest, but not necessarily all of them. But a universal one, it means it's at the top. It's that group will exist amongst all of the different domains. So your first choice is to choose the scope of that this group. Now, it doesn't really matter for us because there's only one domain controller in our group, so I'm just going to leave it set to the default global. And then here for group type, there's two different options: security group or distribution group. A distribution group is basically just a listserv. It lets you communicate to multiple groups or multiple users within that group all at once. Or provide, let's say I wanted to give like a good example is like email, right? I want to send out email blasts to a big group of people, but I don't want to individually put their emails in the to field. I can create a distribution group, add them all to that distribution group, and I can communicate with them just by using the name of the group versus their individual emails. So the distribution groups work similar to that. They allow one identity for multiple users, and that's really their only purpose. You can't do too much else with them. Security groups, on the other hand, allow you to control permissions and configurations. So I want this to be a security group. I'm leave that set to the default, and I'll hit OK. And now that I see my new sysadmin group has now been created. But that sysadmin group, if I right click on it and go to the properties, I see that now I have some different tabs, mainly the members and member of. If I click on a member of it, I see that is not a member of anything. And then when I click on members, I see that it has no members in it. So I need to assign it to a group, and then I need to give it some members. So first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make this sysadmin group a member of the domain admins group. A domain admin, again, is like almost like an administrator on the local machine. They can do whatever they want, but with a domain admin, they can do whatever they want on the entire domain. So they can get on any computer and have full admin rights, or any device in the domain and have full admin rights. When I click on this add button in this wizard, you notice that I get a little area where I can type in the name of the group that I'm looking for. But let's say I don't really know how that name is written out. I can hit the advanced button, and instead I can just maybe start typing some of the characters of the name. So I'm going to write DOM and say find now, and now it'll find me all of the groups that start with DOM. And here's domain admins there, but there's some other ones too. So I'll click on domain admins. Okay, it gets verified here, and then I hit OK again, and now a sysadmin is going to be a member of the domain admins. And since inheritance is on this server, what that means is now my sysadmins group has all the same permissions as the domain admins group. So I'll apply that. And then the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to now give the sysadmin group some membership. So click on that members tab, hit add, go to my advanced search. I want to start typing in Luke. Fine. Oh, look, I forgot his last name first. So start typing in Sky, and then fine. And there his account is. Okay. And it's verified. And then I hit OK again. And now Luke Skywalker is a member of the sysadmins group. So the way that works is now, since Luke is a member of sysadmins and sysadmins is a member of domain admins, Luke Skywalker is effectively a domain admin on this network. And that's how we manage permissions. So now, instead of individually giving Luke those permissions, I've added him to a group that has inherited those permissions. So if I want to take those permissions away from him, I simply remove him from the group. That's way more manageable than giving a bunch of people individual permissions and then having to track all of them. And that is the last step in our Server 2019 tutorial. So to get credit for this, again, you're going to give me screenshots of the final screen that shows the results of all the configuration changes that you made when you're promoting your server to a domain controller. So that'll be one of your screenshots. Then you're going to show me a screenshot of your users folder with your account that you've created. Then you're also going to show me a screenshot of your group's OU with your sysadmin group that you've created. And then one more screenshot with the membership, with your user now being a member of that sysadmins group.